Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Of MSP 1337, I'm joined this week by Dom Kirby of Pax8. Dom, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I think this is my second show.
It is your second show, but I think it's weird to say welcome to the show again, because then I have to clarify how many times. And there are a few people that I don't know that I could actually say how many times they've been on. Matt Lee would be one that I'd be like, welcome to the show a lot of times. So this week, and actually through the month of December, we're doing the predictions for 2026, and I will reserve the look back. I always reserve the look back full episode for right between Christmas and New Year's, because that's kind of the, bah humbug. You didn't get the presents you wanted for Christmas, and you're already, working on how to fail your New Year's resolution. So it's a great time to look back at how you failed previously and in the year you're in. But again, so this week we're piggyback on last week with Chris Lair, and we'll ask some questions at the end that everybody wants answers to, or they seemingly want answers to. So I won't ask you to answer this question now, so you can think about it. Is there one book that you read in 2025 that you're like, everybody needs to read this? So keep that at the back of your mind, because I'll ask you again at the end. I just figured, you can usually figure out in 30 minutes which book it was. So let's kick it off. Dom, 2026 is just weeks away, and there's all kinds of threat actors and challenges that we face. What is your prediction for how things are going to fare for the MSP?
It's going to be an interesting time. I think if we look at 25 briefly, right, and we sort of see what was very successful for threat actors, it's literally the same thing that was successful in 24 and 23, and we can go a long ways back, right? And with the statistics that have come out, I don't have the numbers on my head, but it's, Microsoft saying less than 50% of their auth sessions have MFA on Entra.
Yeah.
Right. And I think the protagonist in me really wants to celebrate that number came up from like 20 some odd percent. I think it's 41. But the reality is, like, marginal gain doesn't really count in this arena, right? It still means the same attacks are going to exist, just with slightly less range, slightly less wide range of targets, right? So this is a problem, and I think attacks against basic cyber hygiene are going to continue. And I think I called that last year on the game. But as we think about that, that's kind of terrifying, right? Like, we're having the same conversation over and over again, and it needs to get done. And at the same time, there's going to be new introductions, and maybe we'll get to AI in a minute, but lately Microsoft has really been harping on applications and application permissions, right? Mm-hmm. If you think about Entra and Graph and OAuth and the way you interact with your environment, there's an explosion of apps, and there's not an explosion of app governance. And that's a fantastic way to get a foothold in a tenant. No different than like deploying a remote access tool on your server back in the day was how I would get a foothold in your on-prem environment. Sure. So I think those application level attacks, still identity, are going to reign supreme, right? That's going to be how I get your data and use that to extort you or for whatever I'm going to use your data for. Or we were talking about insurance before the show. If I can get your insurance binder, I know exactly what to ransom you for so that I get paid, right? So there's a lot of those techniques we're seeing. I think we
saw that. We used to see that where, if depending on the target, you would look for like the marketing or the sales folders to find out what kind of margins do they likely have when they do a sale. If the deal closes, on a $2 million project and they're doing 30 to 40% margin, you're like, well, we know exactly how much money we should be asking for.
Right. And it's really strategic on their part, right? I'm actually like, I mean, I'm mad about it, but I'm also kind of proud of them. That's smart.
Well, yeah, you think about it like, they're using the tools and they're making good business decisions, right? Like if you,
Right.
yeah, how do I maximize my growth opportunity without having to hire more resources? Sounds familiar.
Right. Right.
It's funny, GTIA published their cybersecurity channel trends, and a couple of the things that were in there, and I hadn't even planned on bringing it up until some of the things that you said looking back at 2025, but they were talking about how as we go into 2026, it's really only a third of the MSPs that are really trying to build trust with internal security, custom education, compliance, that kind of thing. It's only a third. And you're like,
Right.
wait, 33% roughly are looking to bolster their defenses and the way they approach the threat landscape. How are we in 2025 going into 2026 where it isn't embedded into everything that we do? Like it should be part of our structure. Yeah, I mean, objectively, if it's not part of everything that we do, it's not baked into the fabric of our ecosystem, we're probably not going to be here for very long.
Oh, absolutely. Right. It's security is very much not a technical issue, right? We use a lot of technical tools to be better at
Right.
it, but it's very people oriented um, for everyone, right? If you think about your cloud provider and their need to drive a security culture and secure design, and you as an MSP have taken to the term victimization at scale, right? And that's what an insecure MSP creates. I think the multiplier on potential payment if I'm a threat actor is ridiculous if you're an MSP, right? If I can get a hook and affect all your clients. So I call it victimization at scale. And to your point, doing less with more, or more with less rather, that's a big deal right now. And we're seeing it, right? Matt will happily talk to you about the cases they're seeing at CyberRise and kind of what they're dealing
Right.
with. And that's just the ones they know about. So I think that's going to be a continued thing. If the number's 33%, I mean, that's terrifying, right?
Right. I think it was actually 31%. ITSPs must build trust with internal security. How do they not have that today?
Right. It should be, another cliche I guess I use is every decision is a security decision if you're running an MSP, right? The way you operate and the things you do have an impact. My favorite examples, we're very proud of some of the clients we pick up, or at least I was when I ran a shop, and we put them on the website, right? Well, what that enables me to do is go to your website, see who your clients are, and start calling them and say, "Hey, I'm from Chris's MSP." Right. So
Yeah.
that's a marketing decision, right? And typically it's a good marketing decision. Marketers love social proof, but have you dealt with the ramifications of that? Have you talked to clients about what this means and gotten their willingness to have their brand exposed like that?
Right. Yeah. The what could have been avoided, it's largely the language that they hear from their prospective clients or existing clients as to why they're not doing something is the same excuse
Right.
that and I remember when I had mine, we did the same thing. I'm sure you can relate. Like, yep, we're not spending money on that because it's just not likely to happen to us, and we have so
Right.
many other fires to manage, let alone put them out. I joke about the open source space, but at the same time can be very serious. I was looking at some of the tools that are out there, and if I think back, 4 or 5 years ago, installers were difficult. Like they natively didn't have, like, you'd run the installer and like 80% of it would fail. Like you're like, oh
Right.
yeah, you got to go fix the JSON file, or you got to go modify the text file in order for
Right.
things to work properly. Even for things as simple as like a pfSense firewall had weird nuances that you had to understand in order for it to deploy like you wanted it to. And then you
Right.
fast forward today and you look at things like, Proxmox and some of the other infrastructure tools that are out there, and it's like you hit install and you're presented with a wizard that walks you through doing exactly what you want it to on a level that we used to benefit maybe, and with the joining of support from an enterprise vendor.
Right.
It's changing.
It's changing a lot. Um, but I also I also think, I don't know, open source is interesting. And what I really don't believe in is the many eyes model, right?
Sure, I don't either.
The assumption that open source is secure because other people see it. The other people that don't see it are application security analysts, most likely,
Right.
right?
Right.
Um,
And why would I spend time doing that? I deployed it so I could use it, not so I could,
right,
monitor what it doesn't do well
right,
or,
right.
or what flaws it has.
But I will say Proxmox in particular is primed to win, right? Proxmox has a commercial model. Um, And if you're not cloud and you used to use VMware and you don't like Hyper-V, you're probably buying
Sure.
Proxmox, right?
Well, I mean, let's go down that the many eyes thing. So to your point, like I think the open source tool that you found on a GitHub repository that was last updated, 3 years ago, and that's the
Okay.
tool you picked because it was free. Yeah, I have a lot of concerns about that decision making process. But if you're looking at vendors who have products NFR, not for commercial use or are have an open source or community edition, you're weighing risks very differently than you would be if it's just like, eight guys from around the world are putting their heads together to build some
Right.
cool tool. Proxmox is a great example of that. To your point about commercial, I mean, we've seen Linux stand the test of time. I mean, there's probably more flavors of Linux than there are at this point in time flavors of ice cream.
Oh, easily. Yeah. And there's always
Right.
new ones, right?
Right. So I guess we can predict that we're going to see more adoption of open source tools. That's not where I was going to lead, but
I would call that purely from an infrastructure standpoint in the Broadcom nightmare, right? I think
yeah,
they're like it's going to be XCP with
sure,
XO or Proxmox, which again, like we were talking about, those are pretty mainstream at this point and less of a concern than my random GitHub repo that like I built this cool thing 5 years ago and forgot about
yeah.
it. I just recently went through and archived all my old crap so that people know not to use it. But
If it's in the archive folder, that
yeah,
tends to mean not current maintained.
right, exactly. Yeah, it's got a big yellow banner. Use at your own risk.
Yeah, it's interesting, but like, going back to just using Proxmox as a good example, um, the challenge that I think a lot of MSPs have is where do I spend my money? Do I
Right,
spend it on a commercial product? Do I spend it on an open source product? Because you're either spending money, the old school way of like transactional, I wrote you a check, or I'm consuming time, FTE
right.
resources to manage it. What I find interesting, and I was reading this article the other day, is was talking about the maturity of Windows Defender. And just looking back at the history of Windows Defender over time, it never made it in the top, 50
Right.
product list. It didn't make the top 50. And now it consistently, makes it in the top 5 or 10. And I'm not saying that to say it's good, bad, or otherwise, but that's not something that you have to pay more for in
Right.
your environment, right? And so it's like, where do I invest my money? Where do I draw a line in the sand and saying we are investing for proactive, left of the new crater or to the right of the crater, right? Like, and how
Right.
big does the crater actually? How big the crater gets depends largely on how well or how quickly I can recover. And so, I think that would be. I'd be curious your thoughts on as we look at 2026. Is there a pattern emerging where it says, MSPs really need to consider investing heavily in certain niches that maybe they hadn't considered before?
I don't know if it's about a niche so much. Is it about really investing your time in the customer's business, right? And what I mean by that is a lot of MSPs that I work with are like the tech guy, right? And they're really good at it and they deliver
Yeah,
high value technology. But that's all commoditized at this point, right? I have so little interest in like what EDR you use or what backup product or what have you. And I have a lot more interest in like how do I make more money or progress my mission forward because of what you're doing for me. And the only way to illustrate that value is to have business conversations, right? And I think
sure.
that will expose a lot and give you a lot of opportunity. If you're having, like a boardroom conversation, you start to expose like budget, and then you start to help drive decisions on how to spend that budget. And then security comes into the mix naturally, and you have the opportunity to influence that spend, and you're going to
Yeah.
invest. You need to be investing some on either side of the crater, right? Because you cannot prevent the crater from
Balance. Yeah.
happening, right? Like data governance is obviously going to be a huge topic, or should be a huge topic, but so is MFA because we're still here talking about MFA, right?
This maybe this is a loaded question because you said, a techie thing and a governance thing at the same time, right? If you have good governance and you have the employees and leadership of an organization aligning to a set of mature policies and process procedures, then wouldn't the MFA be a non-issue? Because if there is good governance and there's an understanding of why certain things are being put in place and why they're necessary, that the conversation doesn't have to keep being brought up like, why do you not have MFA on your credentialed logins?
Yeah, that's a good point, and I think if you apply too much logic to those situations, you'll drive yourself crazy, right? Because I've met CEOs and whatever CXOs, right, leaders that are heavily invested in like, yeah, everybody needs this, but also not me, right? And that's a very I don't even know the word for it. It's an
Well,
annoying
that's
condition.
that's well, I would argue that that is the absence of true governance because anytime an individual in an organization, particularly when they are in the leadership role, business owner, C-suite, that kind of thing, that decision is about me and my decisions to be a part of this ecosystem and
Right.
not what's best for the organization. Because I've made it very clear I don't care.
You're absolutely right. Right. I just think that situation will still come up, and there will be. I mean, at that point, I suppose it's theater, right? Like if you're not applying what you've decided you're going to govern to yourself, then
Sure.
it's not governance, it's theater.
Yeah, and I think the maturity process is a development cycle of that, right? So a
Yeah.
business owner that has 5 employees or 2 employees and they're working through like their policies and what they want to envision their company to look like in 5 years, there's probably going to be a lot of rewriting of those policies because it's very much a reflection of self because I have nothing else to use to build
Right.
this out. As we get bigger, as the risks, the opportunities come through, now those decisions to protect the entity become more critical than protecting me myself. I mean, obviously, you want one to protect the other, but that's
I mean, that's a complicated one, right? But you're right. There's different growth phases. If you're a solopreneur, like that's not even on your mind.
no,
Um,
I
if
would not
you're
expect it to be either.
right, right, and if you're small or family oriented, you your wife and your kid and your cousin that works with you, like there's not that sort of professional dynamic that exists in a more mature business. And then when it becomes an actual tangible thing, and I think there is a moment in any business you start, if you grow it to a certain point, it becomes a tangible thing that isn't you, or it should, right? If you ever want to sleep again. So maybe at that point, it's 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 definitely easier at least to have a conversation and separate the business from the person and understand that at some point they're two different things and you have to treat it like two different things as a leader.
Yep.
And now if you're to the point where they're open to have those kind of business conversations, one, that's a great client, most likely, right? And you need to hold on to that one. Uh,
Sure.
and two, conversations like MFA, uh, obviously need to come up if they don't have it, but should flow smoothly if you can tie it back to some goal that they have of risk remediation, probably, right?
Yeah. Do you think that this gets into, I think back to when we had our MSP, and I hear this a lot in conversation with MSPs today, is they're starting to do this, but it's still a difficult challenge, and that is having the conversation around risk. Like they'll talk about what products or services need to be implemented to, secure the business, but they're not really talking about the what risks they're trying to remediate against, what business risks they're trying to help the client, not lose sleep over. Because at the end of the
Right,
day, MSPs are not trying to also run their client businesses. They're
right,
hoping that the client will tell them or articulate to them exactly, almost to an extent, what tools will you put in here? Because that's what I want to know what you're going to
right,
put in. Like I have a hardware store and I have lots of tools, and you, the client, are like, well, I need a hammer and I need a screwdriver, and you're like, cool, I'm just going to throw in a toolbox because I know you'll need that too.
right, right. That's a really great point. And I think, again, it depends on the MSP and your own practice type and how, like, what you sell,
Sure.
essentially. Hammers are commoditized, right? Like, if I go to Home Depot and I think their hammer's too expensive, I'm going to Lowe's and see if it's cheaper,
Sure.
right? If you really get into the business and you have these business, it's not trying to run their business, it's trying to advise them how to best run their business, right? And that's a very different. If I hire a CIO in-house, I expect him to have a fiduciary interest in the business. In fact, it's probably in his
Sure.
contract. If I outsource that and my MSP gives me what they would call a VCIO, I would expect them to sort of carry some of that executive weight into a
Yeah.
meeting and show me what I don't know, right? And again, maturity of business and the customer, it depends. But if I'm that customer that's thinking about these
Yeah.
things, I would want to show that. Risk management's a hard conversation, at least until you've done it a few times, because uh, risk typically hasn't happened yet. Like everyone gets a cyber budget after the big breach, right? But
Right. Right.
having that risk conversation in advance is tricky. I love analogies when I'm talking risk. I'll say, you drove to the office, did you put your seatbelt on? And you can drive through outcomes and influencing factors and things. I have a slide
Sure.
for it, but in a nutshell, like it's uh, explain to them what risk is. They already know, but you need to re-explain it, and then really dive through. Okay, what can you do about this risk? Right.
Hmm.
Well, here's a few options. You can ignore it. That's always an option, right? Or you can turn on MFA, or you could do this, you could do that, and then you kind of steer them to outcomes that either are or are not great, right?
Right.
And at that point, you make them a fool for picking the not great outcome, right? So it's just about unpacking it for me.
So thinking about the seatbelt analogy for a second, it makes me think about, the automobile industry didn't drive the seatbelts, right? Like they weren't like, we should put seatbelts in
Right.
cars to keep people safe.
Yeah, they
They,
cost money.
yeah, yeah. But fast forward, I think we have a different scenario playing out now in the same space. Is the seatbelt safe, or is the airbags what keeps us safe? Is it like there's, and please don't think I'm saying I'm an advocate
Sure.
for not wearing seatbelts, but like the technology and the changes that have happened to get us to where we have airbags, and remember, airbags weren't just one and done, like, and we just said, okay, once we put one in the steering wheel and the passenger side, then we don't have to do
Right.
airbags anymore. Now they have them in the curtains, in the
Right.
side, you're basically getting thrown into a hamster ball when
Right.
when those airbags deploy, right? Like, and so the reason why I bring that up is if I think back to how simple it was when they brought the seatbelt to the equation versus what we're seeing from a risk standpoint with the MSPs working with their clients. We're no longer just talking about you need to have a seatbelt on to run a business. You've got to have all these other things in place that we don't want to talk about. Like, I think it's really interesting as we go into 2026. Does the cost of doing business, are we factoring in everything, or just going back to the whole, hey, if you can dream it, you can do it?
Oh, that's a great question. Um, Cost of doing business is an interesting conversation, depending on sort of your mantra on like AI and maybe agents and automation and that sort of thing. But
Sure.
generally speaking, um, you know, most businesses that MSPs serve can't eat the elephant. I can't take all the CIS safeguards and put them on your desk and be like, we're gonna get all these done this year. That's
Right.
just they literally do not have the resources to do that. Um, so
I would argue
going
that large entities don't have them either.
Yeah, probably not, right? Unless they work for defense and it's being pushed on them. But I think um, risk management also requires sort of prioritizing risk and deciding which ones get done and having sound defensible reasoning behind that. And I
Sure.
think if you're going to attack innovation in 2026, you need to attack risk in that fashion, right?
Yeah.
If you're working with a client on baseline risk, you need to help them come up with a risk register and charge for that work, by the way. But
Oh,
uh,
you just made me so. I just got goosebumps. Like you said the. I was actually going to ask that question. You hear this a lot. If there's the maturity there, they understand potentially what a poem is, or they understand like vulnerability remediation because they see that it's a bad thing. It's high, medium, or low. They should probably do something about it. if it's medium or low, it probably goes into a patch cycle and they're not doing too much to worry about it. High,
Right.
especially when it's like, was a 0 day or recently has been, someone has released a patch because it is a exploited in the wild happening in our, while we're sleeping. I have not heard anybody till I heard it from you that it wasn't coming out of my own mouth, I would say, that said risk register. With what time we have left, I think it'd be really cool to talk a little bit about what a risk register is and articulate how MSPs, as we go into 2026, should really look at why that's important. Not trying to downplay poems and
Sure.
that kind of thing, but why a risk register is so important for MSPs.
I'll kind of spin this a bit and kind of talk through how you should talk about it to clients, because risk register is a great term, and I learned about it even more in my CISSP, and you can go to any down academia traction control frameworks,
Sure.
and they all talk about this. But if you take all of that fluff, the industry fluff out of it, and you sit down with the client and you say, hey, we need to make a list of things that can go wrong, right? And by the way, when they founded their business, that's probably a lie. Not when they founded a business, but maybe as it started building, they probably made a list of things that could go wrong, right? It's the same thing, right? You're looking at a decision about maybe attacking a new market or launching a new product. You have to understand what can go wrong, or you as an executive cannot make an informed decision.
Sure.
It's the same thing. So if we really simplify it and we say, hey, here are the things like in your IT environment that I'm concerned about, and here's why. And here's what we think the impact would be. We're going to sit down and we're going to score all these, right? I've scored the
Sure.
likelihood for you because I'm the technical person and I know that. We're going to sit down and we're going to score like how bad would it hurt if your business just couldn't function anymore, like everything was down. Well, that's obvious, right? It's
Yeah.
bad. I'm done. And then kind of you work down a list of, okay, your employee gets compromised and XYZ data gets leaked. Oh, that's a 3 out of 5 or it's a 4 out of 5. And you work through this list and you suddenly have this like mathematically prioritized list of problems to solve, right?
Yep.
And I do this in Excel, by the way.
It's same.
Like you give it a 1 to 5, how likely is it to happen? A 1 to 5, how bad does it hurt? And like you multiply
Yep.
those two and you take care of the 25s first. And it's very simple. Now I take that back to the client and I say, hey, here's what you and I just agreed to. And you said these 5 things would really hurt. Here's what we need to do to get that fixed for you. Here's what we need from you in terms of cooperation and help. And you agree to that. And the really cool thing about that is it's defensible. You've made smart decisions,
Yep.
right? But it's also like a sales pipeline. It's like, hey, you and I, we already agreed on this. I'm not selling you anything. You said this is a 20 for you, so we need to go deal with it. We already dealt with 25. And then you can work with the client based on their budget or available, bandwidth and cycles to get things done.
Yeah.
And man, if you have a risk register and you chew through, I mean, depending on the business, even 10% a year, that client is so far ahead of
Yeah.
other people's clients, right?
Well, and it's interesting because when you think about just the model that you described, this is a living document. This is evolving day to day, right? Because we don't have control over the threat landscape. We don't have all we have control over is what we do about what we're making decisions on, and those are going to change based on all of those environmental variables. You can even go so far as to say a lot of these may end up on a poem or on some sort of project sheet. One of the things I always like to joke about, and it's not so much funny as it is the outcome, is that you'll have your, like you talked about tackling the top 5 or 10 that are in that high to the organization. But then there's the ones that are like low. And you're looking at your lows and they're the 1s and the 3s, and you're like, wait a second. If I fix that 3, it corrects 4 of those 25s.
Right.
And that's one of the ones that I loved tackling those because beyond risk register is also what's the cost to remediate. And the Phyllis Lee statement of if the effort or financial output to remediate is going to cost more than the impact to your business of having it remediated, then it's probably not a good investment. And as you look at some of those, especially the ones that are like low cost investment, finding out that they also corrected some of those what were seemingly expensive at the time, which goes back to your point, like how important a risk register is, because once you start this exercise of doing it on a regular basis, some of these other things become a whole lot less overwhelming because you can't put all of them, to your point. I can't just take everything that's going bad and just put it on a
Right.
list and say, this is the to-do list for tomorrow.
Right. Right. Yeah, you gotta
Um,
do one a day, man. One a day. I don't like not literally, but and I think there's a lot of business owners and maybe even MSP owners. I know I've met a couple that are only looking, you can call it toxic positivity. They're looking at the results. Their QBR is we solved 52 tickets with an MTTR of 8 seconds and whatever.
yeah,
None of that matters if you have this skeleton sitting over here that's going to kill everything, right? So bring problems, and that's what an executive would do. Is a bit, or that's what a business advisor would do. Is say, hey, we're doing a good job over here. Things feel good. We got this capital project done or whatever happened, but hey, we haven't looked at this risk register in 2 quarters. We really, in this next half, need to pick something and knock it out. Um, and you've introduced a problem, and you've sort of forced an executive of any scale, right? An
sure.
executive of a 5-person business is still an executive, but you've forced them to have a conversation about something potentially uncomfortable, which is good for your relationship with them, like human to human, professional,
Yeah.
but also good for your business's relationship with them, saying, "Man, they're calling me out and they're helping me do better." Right?
Well, and I think you, not to trivialize a risk register, but I mean, it's an opportunity really to, at the end of the day, do proactive planning for the organization. It's,
Right.
you're looking at potential risks. You've done that for them. You sit down with them and go, hey, together we're going to strategize about how we're going to plan for the future. And some or many of the things that are talked about are going to end up on some sort of, project plan to get those addressed. And the urgency found in the rest register is going to dictate, in many cases, the timeline for when those to-dos are going to get done.
But imagine coming into January and it's already in their budget, right? Like it's probably
Oh,
too late for
geez.
this year, but like say you had this conversation in October or so, maybe
Yep.
August when they're thinking about their budget, they'd be like, "Sweet, here's the budget. Like which of these things are we going to get done?" That's a sign of ultimate trust,
Yep.
right? And I think if you can get there, you'll be a lot less frustrated because I used to get so annoyed with clients that didn't want to do things until my first one was like, "Here's your budget." And I was like, "What?"
Yeah.
um,
I I can relate to that. Budgets change the way you think about problems too, because if I have a budget, I'm now working on how to solve my problems within that limit.
right.
If I have no budget, I'm scared to talk about anything because I don't know if they're going to say, yes, sorry, it's not in the budget that we didn't share with you. No, we don't have the money for that. Or yes, we do. And the yes, we do, it's like, okay, great. I brought something up. Now they're dwelling on it. And yes, it's great that we would do that, but I can't come back to them now later and go, I was wrong. That's not the one thing that we should have done for your spend. It should have been these four other things that actually cost a whole lot less. But because we're ad hocing this,
Right.
I just, crossed my fingers, pointed at the wall, got lucky on the one that you said yes to.
Right. 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 Yeah. And that's being strategic, right? And it's incredibly important to think that way, especially, cybersecurity is a part of this, but you're going to have customers coming to you be like, how do I use this AI thing? Or what is this Copilot thing? Or what is this
Yep.
automation that I saw? You know, I got $10 on there being a Super Bowl commercial with some sort of Copilot agent thing, right? And like
Nice.
so, consumer awareness is a real thing, just like it was with Teams during COVID. Um,
Sure.
so being ready to be strategic and say, yeah, you know what, that's really cool. Let's dive into what you actually want to do here, and you can work risk into that conversation too. So I
Yeah.
think it's man, I don't care about your tools. If I was a business owner, you came to me and said you're going to deploy Sentinel-1, I don't care, right? What are you actually doing for me? I don't care what tools you use to do it.
Right. And probably even more so to not say what the tools are, because if a tool has a problem, you can replace it if you didn't tell them about it. If it's a
Right,
tool that you told them about and now they're calling you and saying, hey, S1 or fill in the blank is, in the news, what are you doing about it? Well,
right,
maybe nothing because it doesn't apply. And the client
right,
doesn't care. They just saw what was in the news.
right.
Don, we are almost out of time, so I'll go back and now that you've had plenty of time to think about it, what is the book that you would recommend for the MSP business owners, tax, et cetera, to read as we go into 2026?
So it's conveniently sitting right over here. I picked this book up earlier this year. It's called Executive Presence, and I sort of picked it up on my own journey to like be a little bit more masterful in the boardroom, right? So
Okay,
I think it's more of an owner's book or a VCIO's book, but I found a lot of insights in there about um, handling myself in those high pressure boardroom situations.
sure. So this would potentially apply to someone that's also providing like cyber leadership services
Yeah,
to be able to speak that language. I love it. Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show. And for those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.